No, it's a really interesting race. I mean, this guy has been in Idaho politics since 1970, right? I was 2 years
good
old.
Lord, that was the year I was born.
I wasn't born yet. Hello, welcome to the Politics Chicks podcast. I'm Monica Healy.
And I'm Christy Branham.
Today we're talking with Todd Achilles, an independent candidate for the United States Senate in Idaho. Todd has had a pretty remarkable path to this race. He's a former U.S. Army tank commander and armor officer, a former member of the Idaho House of Representatives, and has held executive leadership positions in the technology and business world, including with T-Mobile and Hewlett-Packard. Today, he teaches public policy at Boise State University, the College of Idaho, and UC Berkeley, and he's now running for the U.S. Senate as an independent.
Todd, welcome to the Politics Chicks. We're super happy to have you here today.
Oh, this is great. Christy, Monica, happy to be here.
Great to have you here. And before we dig into things, I want to thank you for your service. I am a daughter of a serviceman myself, and I appreciate what the military does for us. And now let's go back to the beginning. You grew up on a family farm and then served in the Army as a tank commander and armor officer. And how did those experiences teach you about leadership?
Oh, a lot. The military is built around just this strong ethic of leadership and teamwork and accountability. That's the very essence of what it means to serve. And I remember like one of my very first times I was leading a small unit in a squad, and one of the people in the squad, their uniform wasn't correct, or they weren't prepared for this mission we were going on, and the drill sergeant starts going off on me, right? Why isn't this person ready? And my initial response is, well, I don't know. Ask them, which is the wrong answer in the military. You're accountable for that. That was one of those indelible lessons where, you need to take care of everybody. That core value that leaders eat last, right? And if there's not enough food, you go hungry. You always take care of your troops first, and I think that's what we're missing in politics. We've got so many people so few people that are veterans in Congress right now. They've lost that essence of how do you put your voters first? How do you put your constituents first? That's what you should be serving.
Yes. And I think we saw a really good example of that lack of accountability with the story that the Washington Post broke about Trump exiting Air Force One on a catering truck and leaving part of his staff and the entire press corps on the plane, potentially setting them up as decoys.
Believing that he was still on the plane.
Yes. So I think that is such a good example of that, because in any other administration, the priority would have been the safety of everyone and not just the president of the United States. So you want to talk a little bit about that and how why accountability is so important and why not having it now has really kind of thrown things out of whack for our government.
Yeah, and I teach public policy, and two of sort of my foundational ideas I share with my class is that, good policy starts with the needs of marginalized communities, right? Who's on the edge? Who's the system not working for? That's who we need to bring in and help, number one. And number two is good policy is bipartisan, because it withstands election cycles, right? And enduring policies withstands election cycles and changes in parties. And I think those are just, those are the principles. And it starts with yourself. It starts with the commitment that it's not about you. It's about the people you're serving. And in a little state like Idaho, we're only 2 million people, 2.5 million cows. These are, how do you take care of these 2 million people in this great big state, which is really diverse and different cultures up north from, down on the Southwest, from the Southeast. And that's, I've been on the road now for 14 months, and it's conversations around the state is where you really understand what's important to people.
Why don't you expand on that? Why don't you tell us what is in the front of people's minds in Idaho? Because I'm sure that it's probably similar in a lot of ways to Minnesota, but you have different economic industries there. So do you want to talk about that?
Yeah, absolutely. And it's interesting. unfortunately, the secret that is Idaho is gotten out, and things radically changed during the COVID era when a lot of people moved from Texas and California. The big group of folks come in, we call them cows, California, Oregon, and Washington. But and it's changed the state. I mean, we used to be kind of a medium wage, low cost state. Now we're a low wage, high cost state, and it's just been challenging for Idahoans to keep up with that. And so when I'm talking with Idahoans, and it could be a 100% Republican group down in the southeast corner, or a 100% Dem group in the Boise area, it's always the same things, right? We've just got this outrageous corruption in Congress. We've got to get Congress functioning again. It's an embarrassment. And number two, the economy is rigged. It's not working. And, particularly if you're a Gen Z or millennial, I mean, you are not able to buy a house. You can't afford childcare. You can't afford to have a family. Health insurance is out of whack. I talked to a couple at a county fair down in the southeast corner a few days ago. Guess where they go get major surgery done? The mom needed some surgery.
Where?
Tijuana.
They go to Tijuana because they can't. It's a third the cost of getting the surgery done here. It's a world-class facility. And so they go down there because they can't afford insurance, so they're having to pay cash.
What is your stance on our healthcare system then?
Well, starting with the fact that it's about as broken as you can get. But I'm not a fan of 100% government system. I think that we don't have the tradition of that in this country. I do want to make sure we hold businesses accountable. So I'm kind of, how do we make our hybrid system work better? So number one, hold businesses accountable for all their employees, not just full-time, but full-time and part-time. And number two is we need a better public option. People are getting stuck in bad jobs just because of the health care, but we need a way that creates more mobility for people and a better public option. And listen, I get my care from the VA. So I see the advantages of the VA. I can get a doctor's appointment. Last time I was in 48 hours. The docs are great there. I'm super impressed with the Boise VA, but businesses aren't doing their job. And here's an example of this, if you let me. So, we passed Medicaid expansion in Idaho. We passed it with 61%, highest of any red state in the country. But 1 in 8 folks on the Medicaid expansion population, it's 85,000 Idahoans are on Medicaid expansion. 3 biggest employers, Walmart, Amazon, McDonald's. And when you look at Walmart in Idaho, Walmart's the largest private employer, 9,000 employees, 1 in 8 Walmart employees are getting the health care from Idaho taxpayers, which is just absolute BS corporate socialism. And that's the kind of stuff that we need to crack down on.
Yeah, because they're not paying a living wage if they're having to be on Medicaid.
Yeah.
So
they're not. $18 an hour is the starting wage. And sorry to interrupt, Christy, in most parts of Idaho, a living wage is $25 an hour.
The wealth gap in our country is a huge problem.
It's a huge problem. Huge problem.
Well, you went from the military into a pretty substantial business career, including being an executive, switching gears a little bit for Hewlett-Packard and T-Mobile before serving in the Idaho House. What did you see in the business world that you think government could learn from? Because we elected a president who supposedly was a successful businessman and was going to run this country like a business. Clearly, that is not what's happening. So why don't you take a stab at that?
Yeah, I really enjoyed it. And I got lucky. I got in early in the wireless industry just as it was taking off, and the opportunity to kind of lead innovation and new ways to communicate, which now has just gone to billions and billions of people. It was a ton of fun. I got a couple patents and did some cool stuff. And I think at T-Mobile and Hewlett-Packard, Hewlett-Packard is the original Silicon Valley company, and there was just a profound commitment to the employees, to the community, to the country at Hewlett-Packard. And I really appreciated the values at HP. I think more so than, except for the Army, values were really an important part of how HP governed. And then T-Mobile was just this crazy startup as we're innovating in the wireless industry, as it's taking off. And just, these different companies, people coming together to do something new and unique. But at the end of the day, it's a lot like being in the military. It's about being creative. It's about innovating. It's about being accountable, following through, and building good teams of people who have the resources to get done what they need to get done.
So it's kind of tying those two things that we just talked about together with your experience with the business and the wealth gap in our country. You've worked on issues including minimum wage, non-compete agreements, algorithmic price fixing. What made those important to you?
I see the same thing, Monica, just about the profound wealth inequality in this country right now. We've got roughly $50 trillion that have gone from, 50% of Americans to the top 1% since the late 70s, early 80s. We can't survive as a country if we continue to have this, we've got this incredibly productive economy, but the wealth is being concentrated more and more at the top, and the people that are doing the work aren't getting the benefit of it. So those bills that I brought in the Idaho legislature were intended to kind of level the playing field. Idaho's minimum wage is $7.25. Now, it's unacceptable. Only about 3 or 4% of people working in Idaho fall under that minimum wage, but that's still too much. So I think we got to raise wages. Non-compete agreements have gone from sort of these executive agreements where there's kind of there's a level of negotiation between a business and an executive coming in, where it's gone all the way down to entry-level workers. So that has created this sort of indentured servitude where people can't change jobs. They get stuck in a crappy job with a bad boss, and they can't change because they're tied up with a non-compete. That's wrong. That undermines people's economic liberty. And then when I was door knocking for my legislative campaign, I had a lot of apartment buildings in my district, and I just heard more and more these stories of, hey, they hit me for $100 last year. They're going to hit me for another $100 this year. If this happens again, I'm out because my salary hasn't changed. And you hear these stories, these consistent stories from different buildings owned by different property managers. And I've spent enough time in business. I'm like, there's something going on here. So. And it's very clear that we've had a lot of national property managers come in. They've been busted in other states for price fixing, using algorithms to price fix. And the same things happen in Idaho. The price of a one-bedroom apartment in Idaho has increased 3 times faster than inflation.
That is insane.
And these guys they're sucking hundreds, $400 or $500 million a year out of the Idaho economy with this illegal price fixing. And that's money that could have gone to a down payment on a house, that could have gone to kids' education, a nice dinner out with mom and dad. I mean, this is the kind of, they're just ripping off the Idaho economy, and it pisses me off, and that's why I introduced that bill in the legislature.
You talked about the influx of people during COVID and the years following COVID, and I assume, have you seen that across the entire state, or is there a higher concentration in one part of the state over another?
No, it's happened across the state. Idaho Falls in the east, the Boise area, Coeur d'Alene up north. I mean, we've just had a lot of people come in. It's funny. I think the zip code, when you look at California retirees who are getting their pension, the number one out of California zip code is in the Boise metro area. We have a huge influx of California public sector retirees.
Even though I'm a Minnesotan, I'm temporarily in California. My husband is on a temporary job assignment, and I have seen that just in my short time here. I have met a number of people who are packing up and moving to Idaho.
Yeah.
Very
listen, it's a great place here, but the secret's out, and we gotta help those Idahoans who don't have the benefit of a California pension plan behind them.
Right. Well, let's circle back to your involvement in Idaho politics. And as a part of the state legislature, you've described yourself as one of the most bipartisan, voices in the Idaho legislature. What does bipartisanship actually look like when you're sitting in a state legislature and people have very different political agendas?
Yeah, it's a good question. I've been registered as a Republican in this state longer than I've been a Democrat, but I served in the Idaho legislature as a Democrat. There's 70 seats in the House, 9 were Democrats, to give you guys a sense of what it's like. So if you're not bipartisan, you're basically just taking up a chair and you're not going to get anything done if you can't have those conversations. And I guess my definition of being bipartisan is always looking for those opportunities to bring folks on board, to find those areas of commonality where you can work together. And sometimes we unfortunately, there have been a lot of these kind of social bills that have come through the Idaho legislature, and it would be my LDS colleagues, call them sort of traditional Republicans, who would be the ones that we'd work together and we'd stand up against some of these bills. And on economic issues, on anti-monopoly issues, it'd be a lot of my far-right colleagues. They don't like monopolies any better than I do. So picking your fights, knowing who you can work with, and always looking for an opportunity and finding those open doors. And, hey, you and I are going to disagree until the sun sets on topic A, but on topic B, let's work together.
So you probably fall in with the vast majority of Americans. You have been a Republican, you have been a Democrat, so you probably fall somewhere in the middle. And you have talked about how our two-party system has really failed America. And I think we are seeing that in action right now. What specifically do you believe the two parties are getting wrong?
I think the biggest thing is both of the parties are kicking the can down the road on the really hard issues. National debt is top of it, or, how do we actually get a healthcare system that works rather than just, unwinding it or throwing more subsidies at it. And I think the problem is that both of the parties are just too damn strong. There's too much money. There's too much power. They're picking candidates based on how much money they can raise rather than how good they are on the policy issues or any specific expertise they bring. And nothing's happening. And I think if you look at like the Biden administration, the Inflation Reduction Act, the Bipartisan Infrastructure Act, the CHIPS Act, these were all really good policies, right? They invested in the country. They built infrastructure. They got us to, bring it. And here, Micron, the biggest American memory company, is building a massive new memory fab right on the outskirts of Boise. First time in 40 years we've had a new memory fab in the U.S. This is the kind of state-of-the-art stuff that's important to the economy and it's important to our national security, and it wouldn't have happened without the CHIPS Act, which, of course, my opponent voted against. But there was, Biden had these great elements, but he didn't bring the corresponding revenue to support them. And so if you just left them alone, and you can make that long-term argument that says these infrastructure investments are going to grow the economy and we'll recover it that way, yeah, right? That's just the same argument that we're going to cut taxes and that's going to grow the economy. It doesn't, right? So do these important investments, but bring the corresponding revenue with it, which is the hard part of the conversation. That didn't happen. And I think that's irresponsible policy.
Well, and you reject traditional left-right divide and instead see the fundamental conflict being in that wealth disparity, right? That coalescing of the vast amount of wealth into the upper single-digit percentage of people living in this country. So what does that mean in practical terms for someone sitting in Idaho deciding whether or not to vote for you specifically?
What Idahoans want to hear, and what I've talked to them about, and I think among the different elements that people are excited about my campaign is this commitment to rebuilding an economy that works for everybody. I've worked at two of the largest corporations in America, and I've also done some startups, right? It's incredibly hard to be an entrepreneur and a small business owner today. Everything's stacked against you. And you've got companies like Walmart that are competing unfairly, underpaying their workers, getting preferential deals from suppliers like Pepsi, and they've been busted for this. We got to level the playing field. We got to restore a free and fair economy, and with that, I think when you go after these bad practices of this concentrated corporate power, that benefits small businesses, small farmers, the whole economy lifts up. And when you do that, wages lift up too, because you don't have just a handful of big employers in a town who can suppress wages. So to me, it's all about free and fair markets and healthy competition.
But let's dig into your race, because there's a lot to dig into there. Because first of all, your Republican opponent is an incumbent, and he's 83. Is that correct?
83.
He's
Yep.
83 years old, and like we could do a whole podcast about old people running our country. But maybe even bigger than that is that your Democratic opponent recently dropped out, which changes the dynamic of the race. And it kind of seems like you might have the secret sauce in running as an independent for Idaho. And like, just dive into there.
Yeah, no, it's a really interesting race. I mean, this guy has been in Idaho politics since 1970, right? I was 2 years old.
Oh, good Lord. That was the year I was born.
I wasn't born yet.
Exactly. I mean, and there's just this incredible sense of entitlement from him and he sends out a fundraiser. He calls it, this fake independence coming after my seat. Like, the hell if it's your seat, right? That seat belongs to the people of Idaho. And he's chair of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, an incredibly important position. He hasn't held a hearing on Iran or Venezuela or blown up boats in the Caribbean or threats to Greenland and NATO. I mean, he just does whatever he needs to do to stay in power and to continue to be a committee chair and just rubber stamp the executive branch. I mean, he's a cheerleader for the executive branch, not a check. And so he's just derelict in his constitutional duties, and Idahoans are tired of it. And they're tired of this gerontocracy. With the Democrat pulling out, I mean, honestly, he wasn't campaigning. It's hard to run a statewide race, particularly in a great big state like Idaho. And putting your name on the ballot is hard, and campaigning nonstop is hard. And I think, I give him a lot of credit to be able to look at it and say, this campaign is just not going to turn the corner. It's better for me just to step back. And he and I had met for coffee a couple months before he announced, and we both agreed if we were both in the race, the incumbent's going to win.
Right.
And so who's got the best campaign, who's got the best polling, who's got the best opportunity, and that's where we are now.
So what are you hearing from voters? Because I assume you have been out, knocking doors and been out on the trail. And this is a relatively recent development. It was just last week, correct, that he dropped out? And what are you hearing from voters?
I think the biggest message from voters is just this general frustration in terms of both of the parties kind of going deeper in their corners. The Idaho GOP has been taken over by a bunch of John Birchers, and they've just got some crazy positions in there in the GOP policy platform, like getting rid of universities in the state. I mean, how the hell is that conservative?
Getting rid of universities in the state.
Yes.
Yeah, we need to stop funding universities. Yeah, and that's among one of the more mild ones. But Idaho, listen, if you look at just party registration, it's roughly 65% Republican, about 25% independent, about 15% Democrat. Now, because we have closed primaries, 10 to 15% of Republicans aren't. They're independents or they're Democrats who register as Republicans because that's the name of the game in this state.
Right.
But everybody's just, they're frustrated by the extremism. This isn't the Idaho way. We are a center-right state. We aren't far right. We aren't far left. We care for each other. We want small government that has the capacity to do big things, and we want to watch out for each other, which is why we passed Medicaid expansion by such a huge share. Those are what Idahoans are. Those are the values. Those are the policies that Idahoans are looking for.
And you brought up that there are 2 million people in Idaho and 2.5 million cows in Idaho. So
Yep.
clearly, and it's a geographically, it's a rather large state. It's not small. And you just brought up the Medicaid expansion. I'm curious about the impact on rural hospitals in your state and what's happening in that situation. Because I know here in Minnesota, people who live in upstate Minnesota are sometimes having to drive hundreds of miles to see a cardiologist, to see an oncologist, even to get prenatal care. Is that what's going on in Idaho as well?
Yeah, it is, Christy, and that's a great question. From the very beginning of this campaign, I focused on our small rural hospitals. So these are 15 beds or fewer. Like 60% of the hospitals in Idaho are these rural critical care hospitals. the one big beautiful bill and those cuts to Medicare or Medicaid. I mean, even a 4% cut, that's material. I mean, these little hospitals are operating on 1 or 2 points of margin. Maybe they got a month of cash in the bank. A lot of them were built in the 50s. They got more duct tape keeping them together than they should. But they're just, they're so important in our communities. I was up in this farm in town up in north central Idaho at a veterans coffee, kind of hanging out with the old vets, and one of them came up after me, and he was kind of poking me a little bit because he knew that I was served as a Dem in the legislature, and he was like, you know what, I consider myself an extreme conservative. I'm like, cool, man, what's that mean? And we had a great conversation, super concerned about the national debt. And then we were talking, and I'm like right there with you with the debt, and we're going through other issues. And he shared with me he had a heart attack, and that little critical care hospital in this town that has been there since the 50s saved his life. And we talked about the impact of the one big beautiful bill and how that might lead to the closure of that hospital. And he was like, no, you can't close these hospitals. These are just essential in our communities. We got to keep them open. And this is the essence of the politics that we need now, right? These are consensus issues. We can come together on this stuff, right? We need these hospitals in our communities. We need healthy rural communities. We need a level playing field and an economy that supports small business and supports small farmers. We can't just continue to roll over for these gigantic corporations and mega farms that are just, wasting our economy and paying slave wages.
We've talked to so many candidates who have basically said the same thing, that when you come down to the kitchen table issues, there is so much more that unites us than divides us, because those are the things that affect people's everyday lives. And you've been calling on your opponent to participate in some debates and have essentially said, let's let the voters decide. And is your opponent going to come to the table to debate?
I think he's going to do absolutely everything he can to avoid a debate. Because, he's just gone to ground. He thinks he can just kind of saunter through November 3rd and be there for another 6 years until he's 89, which is ridiculous. So we've got a petition that's out there. I think we're approaching 4,000 signatures on that. We're talking to groups around the state to sponsor debates. So we're going to make it as difficult as possible for him to avoid having a debate and avoid being held accountable for what he's done for the last 18 years.
What do you want the voters to hear in those debates?
Well, I think he's got to answer some hard questions. Like when he entered the Senate, the debt was $10 trillion, and now we're racing towards $40 trillion. So where's your accountability? Where's your responsibility for that, right? If I had that track record at Hewlett-Packard, I would have been kicked out of my second quarter, right? Meg Whitman would have kicked me to the curb. It would have taken no time.
Right.
Why is he consistently? Why is he allowing the White House to take over tariffs when it's so clearly the responsibility of Congress? Why hasn't he done anything to stand up for NATO? Why has he not held any hearings on the Iran war? And just period. We got 5,000 Idahoans on active duty, and he's putting their lives at risk by not doing his constitutional duty. He's the third most powerful person in the country when it comes to foreign affairs. And he's just advocating the White House, right? I mean, our founders are rolling in their grave when you look at this kind of behavior.
Absolutely. And my parents are in their early 80s, and I've noticed a decline in their, in their intellectual capacity and being able to think quickly on their feet, make quick decisions, being able to weigh things out, getting confused sometimes. So, and we've got this cautionary tale happening in Washington, D.C. right now, right? We're watching the president of the United States, his mental decline and his intellectual decline has just been so evident just by the contraction of his vocabulary. And we could go in, that's a whole podcast in itself. But we also see what's going on with Mitch McConnell and whether or not, that's another podcast too. Is Mitch still alive? Is Mitch dead?
It is.
But
where's Waldo for the Senate?
Exactly. But, when you think about that, when you put people that old in government positions, you're creating a high risk situation, right? Because you're putting people who don't have the capacity any longer to think like they did even when they were 60, 65, even 70. Right. And we run into situations like Mitch McConnell, where he's been out of the game now. What are we going on? 59 59 days. I think we're about at 60 at this
2
point.
months,
like that.
yeah.
You know, and the whole thing about his staff covering up and like no real proof of life stuff aside, this is bad for the people of Kentucky because they have no representation right now from him in the Senate. So let's talk about that for a second.
Yeah. I mean, this gerontocracy is just it's unacceptable. And you look at the average age of the founders versus the average age that we have now of our government. And you just see this slide over time. I mean, this was never intended to be somebody serving 3, 4, 5 terms in the Senate, right? So yeah, he just turned 83. He turned 83 in May. So we wished him a happy birthday. We put up some billboards around the state, recognizing him as the richest and oldest senator in Idaho history. That kind of
Well
writes
played.
itself. We had some fun with that.
Well played.
But and with McConnell out, we also recognizes that he's been promoted from the 4th oldest to now the 3rd oldest in the Senate. He's a couple months younger than McConnell and a couple months younger than Biden. And listen, the Dems' decision to run Biden a second time, when everybody knew a year into his first term that he was struggling to keep up, that was a horrible decision. That was bad for the country. More Dems, and I'm one of them, but more Dems need to stand up and say any party that thought that was a good idea doesn't deserve to have the level of authority and influence on U.S. government that those folks did. I mean, that was a horrible decision for the country. So, I mean, we need new blood. We have a lot of hard problems going on. What's the regulatory structure that we need to put around AI? I tell you what, Jim Risch doesn't understand that. He has no idea how that works, right? I mean, I teach public policy. I focus on competition, anti-monopoly, and tech policy. Like I know how to make sure we have AI grows and it's part of makes us more productive and benefits rather than it just becomes this crap that undermines the economy and undermines jobs. So we got to force these people out. And again, a lot of people, and from our polling, and we've made this public, when Idahoans know, when they learn that Jim Risch just turned 83 and he wants to serve until he's 89, 82% of Idahoans are concerned or very concerned about that. 74% of Trump voters. It is the number one issue, and folks are tired of it.
Yes. And in defense of the founding fathers, the average lifespan back in the late 1700s was 49 for men.
Yeah.
So they were dying well before they were starting to deal with intellectual issues related to aging. So
You mentioned AI, and I have said to my husband, he's an engineer, that we have exactly the wrong leadership at the helm to deal with something that is so transformational for not just our country, but really the whole world, to have any sort of regulations around it. But data centers is one of those rare unicorns that is like a unifying issue. Universally, both sides are opposed to having data centers in their backyards. What are you seeing in Idaho about that?
It's the same thing, right? I mean, these things have massive cooling requirements. They use a lot of water. Water is the most precious resource in Idaho, and we do a phenomenal job of allocating this scarce resource between ag and fisheries and recreation and everything else. But listen, there's nothing to spare. And as the economy or as the climate continues to change, water's getting more and more precious. We had a horrible snowpack last winter. Mm-hmm. Warm, not a lot, and we're paying the price for that near the tail end of the growing season. So for a data center to come in and say, hey, we're going to take a bunch of water and we're going to use it for cooling and we're going to take a bunch of power, folks aren't having it. And I think it's great. We're canceling these deals in local communities. And as somebody who comes out of the tech sector, and I've worked in data centers and put together these big operations, these things are incredibly wasteful. They're not even trying, right? They're not even trying to be efficient. A lot of the AI models are just these big sloppy things that are power hungry. They can do a lot better, and we need to hold them accountable for that.
So let's say voters send you to Washington. What are the first 3 things you're going to work on?
Number one, and I think this has to come before everything else, because if we don't make this change, it's going to be harder. We'll never be able to fix the underlying issues. But number one is getting Congress functioning again, breaking the grip of the two parties, term limits and age limits, overturning Citizens United, shutting down these dark money groups, getting money out of our elections, eliminating this gerrymandering thing, and replacing that with something like proportional representation. The day trading that's going on just undermines trust in the institution. And at least, sitting in the Senate, these gigantic omnibus bills, right? Reject them. We should do one bill, one vote, one issue, instead of things like the one big beautiful bill. So number one, get Congress functioning again. Just renew and rejuvenate the institution, and restore good order. And then let's tackle the economy. Let's tackle healthcare. Let's tackle the housing sector. These are the things, the national debt. But without a functioning Congress, I don't think you can tackle these issues. People are just going to continue to kick the can down the road.
And one of the troubling things that came up earlier in the conversation, I just want to circle back on in a second, is that the current state senator wants to take money out of universities in Idaho. And when we look at the rise of authoritarianism, like on Timothy Snyder's model, attacks on education and on the intellectuals is part of how they implement that type of government. But you're a teacher. You teach public policy at Boise State and the College of Idaho and UC Berkeley. And so you've got contact with students, and these students are our future. So what are you hearing from these, I'm going to call them kids. I never thought I would call a college student a kid, right? But what are you hearing from these bright-eyed, somewhat naive, but also fresh and ambitious students that you're teaching right now about the political system?
Yeah, it's fun because I teach public policy, right? So by definition, my students believe in the common good, right? They believe in our system and they want it to work. So there is frustration. I mean, we just kind of shake our head on some of these extremist things that bubble up in Idaho, and like, how is that a good idea? And I'm reading a biography of one of Idaho's Republican senators, Jim McClure. He kind of served in the 70s and the 80s. He came into Congress as a Republican when it was Democrat-controlled Congress. Immediately had a reputation as just being this guy that was all about policy and not about politics, and really respected by his Democratic colleagues. And then, during the Reagan administration, listen, he pushed back on the Reagan administration as a Republican against a Republican president. Because, that's what people are looking for, right? Back in that era when there was a Venn diagram of overlap, and there wasn't any split between Republicans and Democrats about funding education. The only question was, all right, if we got a little extra budget dollars, we're going to put it towards the universities, or we're going to put it towards pre-K. But everybody was all in on public education. And I think that's the politics that we want to return to in Idaho, and I think that's why people are so excited about this campaign.
So you're running as an independent in a pretty Republican state. So let's say you go to Washington. We already have a couple independent senators. We have Angus King and Bernie Sanders, and they caucus with the Democrats. So who are you going to caucus with?
I'm caucusing as an independent. I will not caucus with the Democrats. I'm not going to caucus with the Republicans. And I've been really clear on this. And listen, there's 6 of us. We're all military veterans running as independents for the Senate, right? There's Seth in Montana, Dan in Nebraska, Brian in South Dakota, Ty in Mississippi, Bob in Colorado, and me. And if you look at the likely outcome, just because, the national Dems have given up on little red states like Idaho and Wyoming and the Dakotas. I think a lot of people believe the ceiling for the Dems in the Senate is 48, 49. And if 2 out of the 6 of us win, and you make some assumptions about how November's going to turn out, there's a real possibility that the independents could deny a majority to both parties. And you can't even assign desks in the Senate without having a majority. So the independents would sit as this kind of fulcrum in the Senate. We would be able to negotiate with both parties, set some priorities, and drive that, those policies that we talked about how we get Congress functioning again. But all the power is going to be in the middle. And that's why I think not caucusing with either parties and caucusing in independents is actually where the power is. And I've had a conversation with Senator Joe Manchin about this. He firmly believes that a handful of independents, we'll be able to mark up any bill we want because folks are going to want our support on it. And another biography that I just finished was on Teddy Roosevelt. Teddy was all about controlling the middle, right? He was a great conservative and he was a progressive. And for him, all political power resided in the middle. And I think that's what we need to get back to.
I grew up in South Dakota, which is another very Republican state, but also the home to Tom Daschle, a very well-renowned Democrat. So it would be nice to get back to some politics that are actually looking at those kitchen table issues and the things that unite us rather than divide us.
Yeah. And I think, Monica, just building off of that, the longest serving governor in Idaho was a Democrat, C. Sanders. Second longest serving was Republican Butch Otter. A lot of overlap between what they both represent. And again, I think just like in South Dakota, there's that kind of Western conservative, right? Be really thoughtful with taxpayers' dollars, take care of each other, let people make their own decisions and just live and love how they want. Protecting individual liberties, right? Those are those foundational values that we got to get back to.
That sounds pretty Minnesotan to me.
I think it's pretty American.
Exactly. We need to get back to being more American, basically, and less of the tribalism that is causing a lot of the divide in this country. And
I think, sorry, Christy, I was just gonna build on that. I was a tank commander, so four guys in my tank crew. My loader was from Maryland. My driver was from South Carolina. My gunner was from Louisiana. And me, a farm kid from Oregon. I have no idea what their political perspectives were or what their party registration was. We were just four random guys thrown into this unit, and if we couldn't work together, we'd be dead. And we just need more of that spirit about focusing on the mission, focusing on the hard things that need to get done, and making politics sort of that, that political ideology secondary rather than primary.
And let's end up with something fun, because we've talked about all this serious stuff. So let's do a lightning round and see if we can get some really fun answers. So I'm going to skip coffee and tea. I think we asked that to everybody. But morning person or night owl? Oh yeah. You're a coffee person.
Total morning person. Yeah.
Morning person.
Morning.
Okay, farm life or city life?
Oh, I think I'm a farm life kind of kid.
Where'd you grow up?
On a farm in Oregon.
On a farm. All right.
Yep.
Favorite Idaho season?
Pardon me?
Favorite season in Idaho?
Oh, winter.
Oh. Are you a skier?
I'm a skier. Yeah.
Mountains or water?
Oh, mountains. I'm in Idaho.
Road trip music?
I'm a huge fan of bluegrass, Billy Strings. There's a local bluegrass band called Tater Patch, which is just great. So a lot of bluegrass in the band.
Okay, here's a tough one. Tank commander or college professor? Which taught you more about people?
Oh, wow. I think probably being a tank commander, but you learn a lot about people both in both roles. And a music teacher, I'm sure.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. And we ask this of all of our guests. What's giving you hope right now?
Just all of the conversations I'm having traveling around Idaho. People really want change. They want to have a Congress they can be proud of again, and it can be the hardcore Republican who's never voted for a Dem in his life, who's just incredibly excited about our campaign, and the same thing with the Dem. They want change. They understand the power of their vote, and they're ready to do it.
I think I would speak for both Christy and myself to say that we probably don't agree with you on all the policies, but we certainly agree that there's more that unites us and divides us, and that getting Congress to function again is job number one. So we wish you well on your campaign. And where can listeners learn more about your campaign and how they can get involved?
Well, you can start at the website. That's Achilles4Idaho.com. And of course, we're on all the social platforms, so you can follow us there. And for folks in Idaho, I'm continuing to travel the state, and so we put the event schedule on the website and come on out and let's have a conversation.
And here's your last shot. Is there anything we didn't ask you that you'd like our listeners to know or hear before we close things out?
I tell this to both, Republicans and Democrats. Just reach across the aisle, find those points of consensus. This is what Idaho is all about. These are Idaho values, and just don't be afraid to have those conversations, and just be there for your neighbor.
I love that. Todd, thank you so much for coming on the show today. We appreciate you taking the time to talk to us about your campaign and your experience and what you believe an independent voice can bring to Washington. And I'm excited for you, and I'm excited for our country, because I think that this could be a tremendous step forward if you flip that seat in Idaho.
Well, thank you. Thank you very much, Christy. Yeah, Monica, thank you. I appreciate the time. It was great to talk to you both.
Great to have you on. To our listeners, if you are finding meaning in the stories we're sharing, if something moves you, challenges you, makes you see the world a little differently, please like, comment, and share. It helps more than you know.
And follow us everywhere at The Politics Chicks on Substack, Threads, Blue Sky, Instagram, TikTok, and Facebook.
Thanks for being a part of our community. Keep shining your light so we can find each other in the dark.
And remember, we're stronger together. Thank you again, Todd. This was a great conversation. It was fun.
Go Gen X.
Go Gen X.
Let's do it.